Welcome back to Pen to Pod, where in this episode I chatted with Caeli Faye all about her debut book, Skin of Gold. Caeli is a wealth of knowledge about writing. We chatted a lot about breaking writing norms and using your intuition to plot a great story. She talks about mapping character emotion, which I thought was so cool, and publishing a book that is truly of her heart. This episode does have a trigger warning for discussions about the topics that are in Caeli Faye's book, which include things like sexual violence and abuse, suicidal ideation, depression, etc. So definitely take care of yourself when listening. Skin of Gold is a contemporary novel about 20-year-old November Yu, who goes by Nova. She was thriving as a creative writing student at Columbia University until she was sexually assaulted while studying abroad in South Korea. Now back home on Long Island, Nova is unraveling. She must fight for justice in a foreign legal system. Her scholarship is on the line, and her family doesn't know how to hold space for her pain. And the only one who sees her is Daisy, an alluring, passionate young woman from her support group with secrets of her own. With her, Nova can numb the pain of unsympathetic academic advisors and the ongoing criminal investigation through substance-fueled nights and moments of fleeting tenderness. But when escaping the pain becomes more dangerous than the pain itself, Nova is forced to confront what healing requires and what survival really costs. This conversation was just so beautiful. I remember when I was editing and listening back to the conversation, Caeli has great advice for writers on how to be intuitive about your own writing and really defending the reason for having a really clear vision of your story and sticking to it no matter what. And reminding us that not every story, I don't think any story should really be made for consumption and consumerism. It's art at the end of the day, and I think Caeli really reminds us of that. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Caeli Faye.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I remember when you first came to AuthorTube and your video popped up on my homepage, and I was like, yay, someone new. And I instantly fell in love with just like your presence, and your filming is great. I feel like that's a hard skill that people don't talk about enough, like getting the filming just right on YouTube. And then when you started talking about your works and I saw that you were ready to start self-publishing Skin of Gold, I just got even more excited about your journey. So thanks for talking to me about it.
Thank you for having me. You were one of the first people I remember connecting with on AuthorTube, so this is a special moment for me too.
Yeah, it's like a full circle moment. This is so fun. And you've moved now too, which I feel like is a fun thing in like in the YouTube space. It's like where we film becomes our backdrop in so many ways. And so I got so used to like your cozy, like lit up bedroom, and now you moved to this new place, and it's so cool to like watch you. Like, I don't know, you've been going through so many life transitions, I feel like.
I do miss my cozy background because now when I look at my background, it's all like blank, and I'm like, ooh, this is not, not what I'm used to looking at and editing. There's
It's a
definitely been a
we'll get
transition, but I hope to fill it up soon.
Yes, yes, we will get back there. But that's so fun. Like, I mean, I hate moving. I feel like it's very fun, but it's also the worst experience in the world, I think.
Also very stressful.
Yes. So, speaking of moving, I usually like to start my interviews out with place, just because I always say at the top of my shows, place is usually one of my favorite parts of a book. I feel like it grounds us to obviously where we are, but it also becomes a character within the story. And I always am interested to know, do you feel like where you've lived or where you've grown up or anything that comes to mind when I say place has impacted the stories that you write?
For sure. Skin of Gold is set in a fictional town on Long Island. I didn't want to base it on a real town just in case there are people from those towns being like, this is not what, so and so is like. So, but definitely my experience of growing up in Long Island has shaped that setting. Originally, I had a bunch of scenes set within Manhattan and more of like the city space, but as I was going along with the revisions, I realized that my main character, she's not a city girl. And it didn't make sense. I think there's a time and place for putting your character in an ill-fitting environment, but for this story, I think the component of home and the idea of home was really important. Didn't want to have her trying to find a home in a place that wasn't her home. So definitely grounding her within Long Island. Definitely the events that happened prior to Skin of Gold. So when she experiences sexual assault while she's studying abroad in South Korea, that plays a role, but it's more of like a specter haunting her. It's not so much as a lived experience within the novel, but I hope that the presence of that echoes throughout the story.
Yeah. I really like that where one, I like that you instantly were like, she's not a city girl. We gotta give her some room to breathe. But wow, a specter haunting her is such a beautiful way to put a traumatic experience that, living with that and being able to, like you said, find home in a place that is familiar to her, I think is a very common experience that a lot of people have at the age that Nova's at. She's 20, right, in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's a very common experience. So another obligatory question I feel like I have to start with is just taking us back to the beginning of when did you first know you wanted to write, or do you always feel like you have been a writer?
That has definitely been a process. I think it's nice when people know from the beginning, like when they're a child, but I think books have always had a special place in my life. I always enjoyed reading since I was young, but I'd never really considered writing up until like college. So, and even then I went to school undecided, and when it came around to declaring my major, that was when I decided, okay, maybe I want to take writing more seriously. And even then, even when I graduated like a year ago, it was still a process of embracing that author identity of because I think that it takes a lot to commit yourself to being a writer. And it definitely was not an immediate thing for me. I had to grow into it. And I feel like I'm still navigating what that means.
Yeah. What books did you gravitate towards when you were younger that you kind of escaped into?
All the fantasy classics. I think I loved a lot of Cassandra Clare, Sarah J. Maas. Of course, earlier than that, it was Percy Jackson, Harry Potter. All of those classics, for me, they were classics. And
Yeah.
yeah, but I feel like I didn't read very thoroughly just because there's so much reading for school. And now I'm in a place where I can start reading, testing my own preferences. So I'm still in that process of expanding my tastes, but those were definitely the foundation.
I relate to that. So I also majored in creative writing in undergrad, and it is a time. I'd love to hear about your experience in creative writing in undergrad, but it is interesting because you're taking creative writing classes, but you're also taking English classes because that is like the basis of the degree. And my gosh, I just remember there were some semesters where I was like, I'm in 4 different classes where I have to read a book a week. So I have to read 4 books a week. And I remember coming out of college that's like when I stopped writing for a couple years because I stopped reading for a couple years because I was like, I can't right now. No one tell me what to read. Let me read whatever I want. So, how do you feel like you felt the same in that? And how did you kind of like push through that if you did?
I loved the freedom that came with having nobody tell me, like, "You need to read this book by this date,
Mm,
and you need to write this assignment," even if you hated the book and you find it a total bore. It's definitely that freedom has been amazing, so I'm finally able to read for pleasure, and definitely the experience of having a curriculum set by other people. I won't It was good in reading things like I never would have had before, like One of my favorite classes, we were reading a bunch of Asian American texts, and we dove into dictee. I don't think I would have ever read that if it wasn't in that class or going to
Yeah.
school for creative writing. But then there were so many other semesters where we would have to read books that were extremely triggering, and there's like no warning beforehand. Professors don't give a heads up like, hey, these are
Yeah.
possible themes that we will be discussing, and you're just reading a book like they assigned Lolita.
Yeah.
Just like there's so many books that are extremely
Yes.
just a lot, mentally. And I think not a lot of thought is put into how that it can affect the people that these stories are talking about. And that was definitely one of my motivating factors when writing Skin of Gold is I didn't want to recreate that experience for other people. But obviously those intentions don't always line up with the results. So that's what I hope is the outcome for Skin of Gold. But I have a feeling that people with different triggers are probably triggered by certain things that I didn't initially catch. So it's definitely been a learning process, but I am glad that I get to pick and research the books beforehand that I get to read now.
Yeah, definitely. In what other ways do you feel like the BFA in creative writing has helped you prepare to write this book and then self-publish this book? Because I know for other listeners who might not have had a BFA in creative writing, a lot of the undergrad focus in creative writing is on the short story as well as the novel, but a lot of it is like writing short stories when it comes to critique groups. So how do you feel like that process has helped you get to where you are now?
For anyone who's listening who does not have a BFA and they're worrying about, like, if they're wondering what if or if they needed it, I would say don't even worry about it. It's so unnecessary. You do not need a BFA to be a writer or to write a book because, like you said, the focus is not on novel writing at all when you're taking your BFA. I would not say that my BFA has helped me in that process. Writing Skin of Gold, I did that completely outside of school. And the few times that I did bring in some excerpts for critique, I would say actually did not help me in my writing process. But I do think that depends on who you are as a writer. For a long time, I really thought I was a plotter, but I've realized since that I am a pantser. And I think that when you're a pantser, when you receive critique, even if it's coming from a good place, you just have all these ideas of how to implement the critique, even if it's not aligned with your vision for the story. So that happened to me a bunch. And I've concluded from that experience that you should get readers after a certain point. But yeah, I was not working on Cine Golds within my coursework or within college. That was like sort of like I was working at the same time, but it was outside of that experience, separate. And for the publishing aspect, it did not help at all. I remember asking so many professors and just like other students trying to figure out if anyone else was also working on a novel, if how they're going about getting published. But yeah, everyone was just super focused on submitting to journals and submitting their short stories and stuff like that. And not really, the focus was not really on publishing a book. So I feel like I had to teach myself that process after school, after college. Yeah. I don't know if that was what you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Yeah, that's great. I also, yeah, the undergrad experience for creative writing definitely isn't focused on the novel. It is that, short story, you're writing short excerpts so you can get critiqued. How do you feel like the writing feedback? It seems like you were getting maybe not the feedback you were looking for, but I feel like that's also helpful when being a writer. So do you feel like being in those critique circles helped you even understand, like, okay, I know exactly, what type of critique I'm looking for, how I want to be critiqued, and I don't know, do you feel like it helped you kind of with your gut check almost as well, like, as a writer?
It definitely helped me with what you're talking about, like what kind of critique you want to receive, finding what questions you're looking for to be answered by the readers, how to give other people critique. Those are
Yeah.
all definitely helpful skills that I like. If I'm working with a critique partner, it's so useful. Like, you don't want to just be the one receiving, you also want to be the one giving, and both improve your skills and just your awareness of prose and character, everything. So that was definitely helpful. I don't think it was helpful for Sin of Gold. It's helpful just as a person and a writer. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then you said, it's important to get readers early in the process. We might be skipping through to kind of the end here, but did you get some readers for Skin of Gold? And do you have any advice or suggestions? I feel like a lot of people, like a lot of newer writers, have asked me, or I've seen it online asking, like, what do I ask people? Like, what do I ask beta readers for when receiving feedback? Or how do you analyze your own work to realize like what you need in that process?
Okay, well, for me personally, I don't like having readers early on. To me, having outside perspective just in my process with writing, I personally like having readers later once I already have my personal vision for the story played out, so I don't have outside voices influencing that. But once I have a project that I feel like is in the shape of the vision I want, then other people is just for confirming if that is conveyed well enough. So, like, I would ask, are there any places where the tone breaks? There any places where the character behaves in a way that does not fit their character? Any lines or words or passages that seem off or you had to reread twice because it doesn't make sense? Like, things for clarity, things for uneven tone, asking if there are certain scenes that it's very important that I convey this, like, if I want to show a character who's very complex, does that complexity come through in this scene, or they're coming off in this way that I don't intend for them to come off? So those are it's more like clarifying if what I'm saying is coming across to the other person, not so much asking if it's good or, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you look less now, it feels like, for critique partners, maybe like writing partners, where, because I feel like critique partners sometimes, it's like I have writing friends who I give chapters to, but I'm giving it to them in the notion of like, give it to me straight. Like, tell me if this is really bad. Like, tell me if this is good or bad from like a writing standpoint. But then it seems like, at least with Skin of Gold, which I think it's smart to make that distinction as well. Like, sometimes you might want a writing friend partner who's like actually critiquing, like, is this writing quality or should I up it a little? And then with beta readers, it's a completely different experience. Like you said, like, you already knew where Skin of Gold was headed. You knew the emotional impact you wanted to have on the readers. And it is more of that, like, is the story hitting the beats I'm trying to hit? Is it impacting you in the way I want it to impact you in these certain scenes? Are the characters coming across the way I want them to? Which I think is great and important to have, like, that confidence and good sense of your story going into getting reader feedback, because that's what you're judging it up against, I guess, like the version of the story you want it to be, not necessarily the subjective reader opinion, if that makes sense.
I will say that I've learned that your intentions with a story matter a lot too. So I
Yeah.
think I would change my process for future books going forward. I would say that Skin of Gold is definitely an outlier in my work and future things I want to work on, because Skin of Gold was definitely the most personal that I wrote. That in the beginning, it was purely for me. I never had the intention to publish that. So it was more of like an exorcism for myself. So I let myself indulge in as much purple prose and as much like poetic language as I wanted to, even when a lot of the feedback I was receiving when I was an undergrad was that it was off-putting how, lyrical and it was too purple prosy, too flowery in essence. And I really considered, you know, I was like, "Okay, what do I do with this?" Because it just sounds like they just don't like my writing. And it's like when you're faced with that dilemma, there's just a certain point where I'm like, "Okay, I just don't care."
Yeah.
Story, it is what it is, and I think I need to accept that it might not have a market or commercial appeal, and that's okay. So, definitely just accepting that a lot of people may not like this, and it's okay, but keeping that in mind with the intentions, your goals for the book, like, is this something that you want to see on bookshelves and you want to have a grow a huge reader base for this, then I think it's very important to definitely have alpha and beta readers and have feedback along the way. But for Skin of Gold specifically, I didn't need or want a lot of outside input to shape it into a marketable capacity, which definitely plays into why I decided to self-publish this book as opposed to going down the traditional path.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important topic that doesn't always get discussed when talking about feedback, because I think sometimes the advice is just like get good at receiving feedback, like take everything, like listen to everything, but you do have to know at some point when sometimes the critique is just like, okay, I just don't think this person gets what I'm trying to do. I don't think this person understands my writing style and it's not for them, and that's totally fine. And to like stick steadfast with that. I'm always a defender of purple prose, always a defender of purple prose. I feel like there's always a time and a place for it. And like you said, the intention needs to be clear, like, why is this a purple prosy book? And I think it's completely okay. So I love that it seems like you were getting a lot of this feedback in college for pieces of this work and other work, but then you realized, like, okay, I'm going to stand firm on this is my writing style. This is how I want it to come across, and we're going to continue with that. And I feel like that is an important step as a writer, is to stand your ground with what you're writing and not always just like cave in to, again, the subjective whims of different readers.
Definitely taking into account what can be commercially successful is a balance that I think can be difficult. And especially with a debut, it can be hard. I know that for a lot of writers, their debut is not their first book that they wrote. And it's precisely probably for the reason that I just mentioned, is that with your first book, you're writing for yourself, you're figuring out your voice, you're figuring out what kind of characters and world you want to build. And you're not thinking so much, will other people, or I don't know, maybe people are, but you're not in the audience is not in the forefront of your mind when you're writing your first novel.
Yeah.
So I do acknowledge the limitations of Skin of Gold, but I just think that this is the beginning of the work I want to do. And I think that if I can publish Skin of Gold, I can publish anything. There's probably nothing more terrifying than publishing this book. So
Yeah, and that's, you said something earlier too, like this was just for me. So it seems like this was a personal project, like you said, almost an exorcism of feelings and thoughts, and kind of just a story that needed to come out of you for sure. So what made you make the jump from, okay, this is a personal project, to now I think I should just get this out here?
I wanted it to feel like a balm for anyone who has struggled severely with their mental health and with suicidal ideation, with sexual violence, because I think that living in this our current world, it's so hard. It's so hard. Like, you open your phone, there's so many news articles every day about violence against women and children, and you open up social media and there's 1,000 different news articles, and but it's not even just in news, it's in media everywhere, it's in stories everywhere about women being just harassed, and it's just horrible. And a lot of the times I just remember feeling so upset all the time with how these topics were approached, and sort of like, I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones.
Girl, we could have a whole podcast on where I think you're about to go with this. Yes.
Well, I won't go into it, but I think my point stands that it's pervasive everywhere, and it's usually not considerate of someone who has experienced these things. It's more of like put on display for entertainment or for some sob backstory, or
Mm-hmm.
to make, it's not empowering. It's feeds so much into shame, and it's just so defeating. And so this was my way of giving back, for even if, you know, it's not for everyone, for just like the one person who wanted to find themselves in a broken character in a safe place on the page and say, look, this person has reached the lowest of lows. They've made the worst possible decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still okay. They can process that sort of pain without having to relive their own experience. That is what I wanted from this text, because so often people feel like they have to offer up their story on a platter to be believed, for sympathy, for anything, not sympathy, but just to be believed and to feel like their story matters. And I don't want people to have to feel like that, but I want them to be able to sort of find catharsis in Nova's story, where they can feel her pain, know what she's going through, but not need to relive their own, but connect with the aftermath of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I agree wholeheartedly that the media does not, like you said, take care of something as heavy as sexual assault or sexual violence in a manner that would allow someone who's experienced that to, like you said, connect to a character and be able to process maybe their own experience in real time or see what it's like on the other side, living with that afterwards and moving forward. Instead, it is mostly used as kind of a shock effect or, like you said, the traumatic backstory to fluff up a character that maybe wasn't that well written then if you needed something traumatic to add in there to beef up the character. So I agree. And oh my gosh, Game of Thrones. I think it's funny that you mentioned that because in college I wrote a paper about how the sexual violence in Game of Thrones is not needed and that male fantasy writers love to lean into. So I was like, I could go on a diatribe about how, especially in fantasy for some reason, I think it's because it's like not real, but it's also taken from medieval times. A lot of the times, people are like, oh, this just happens, so we can do it whenever we want. I'm like, no, not
It's
really.
just very gratuitous, and
Yeah,
it's like, okay, sure, that's the part you want to be historically accurate, but you can have dragons.
exactly. Okay, so we're going to cherry pick the horrors of the world and not anything else. Okay, cool. So I think that's great. I like that you described it as, people being able to watch Nova process this, what happened to her. And I also like that Nova makes bad decisions. I think that is totally relatable and normal with people in everyday life. And do you, when you were writing Nova, because I feel like this book is very character driven, probably the most character centric novel I've interviewed someone about on Pentapod so far. And when you were writing these characters, you said you were also kind of like a pantser. So, how did you really get in the mindset of them? Because one of your early reviews I saw said that the story itself seems personal, that it traps you inside young Nova's skin, which I thought was also a beautiful sentence and a beautiful, sentiment for your book that you're able to bring us so close into who Nova is and what she's thinking, what she's experiencing. How did that character process go for Nova, but also the other characters that you have in the book?
Nova definitely captures a lot of who I was in the past. So for that reason, she will always be a time capsule to sort of my darkest points in my life. So there's so much of me in Nova. And as for the other characters, I think there's definitely tension between her and her family, her friends, with her therapists, the people in her support group. There's just a lot of tension, all for different reasons. I tried to approach all of them with a level of empathy because each of these characters are going through their own struggles, even if it ends up hurting Nova. And I think realizing that because yes, there's so much of me in Nova, but there's also, you have to make the distinction between you as the author and you, even when it's like a self-insert, you still have to make that distinction clear between your character and you as the author. Yeah, definitely I wanted each person to bring out a different side of her, to show some part of her wounds that weren't going to be present with any other character. But besides that, yeah, I had to trim a lot. There was definitely a lot more I could have put in for each character, but I tried to keep it to the bare bones of what was needed for, because this is Nova's story. If this was a different book, I think I could have focused a lot more on the other characters, but because it's very short. It's 52,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of it is driven by Nova. So I really trimmed down to what was necessary to her story specifically, even if it doesn't do full justice to all of their stories.
Yeah. But I think that's another important thing to be said because it's important to know whose story is being told in any book that you're writing. Even if you are in a multi POV story, it's important to remember there's always one person that's kind of still the center, the main character. That's the driving force of the story. I also like that you said you wanted to focus on how the other characters, it seems like they act as like mirrors to the different sides of Nova, but I think that's also really realistic. Like when you said that, I started thinking about people in my own life. Like, yeah, there are different friends who bring out different sides of me. And I think that is a very human experience. So I think that's really cool that you are consciously trying to do that with each of your characters and making sure, again, that it's always focused on Nova. Did you write this in first person or third person?
First,
First, yeah.
I debated, but I wanted the reader to feel as close to Nova as possible and as immediate. So it's first person present tense.
Okay. Okay, yes. I think that's like the closest you can get to a character is first person present tense. So I love that you made that decision. And you said that you are a pantser, which I am always fascinated by. Oscillate between the two sometimes, or sometimes when I want to plot, sometimes when I want to pants. If you pantsed like all the way through this novel, how was the revision process for you? Like, how did you go back through and realize, like, okay, I know what scenes I need and don't need? Like, did you plot it out afterwards, or were you more intuitively going along, just understanding Nova's story?
The first draft was just 30,000 words. I had no intention of even turning it into novel. I was just writing scenes from my life of what felt true, fictionalizing everything. And there came a point where I was like, okay, I could put more into this. I could try to shape this into a better structured narrative. And it took a few drafts to get it longer because I played around with different characters. There were whole other characters that never made it into the story, different arcs that I completely deleted from the draft. But what was definitely helpful was after I had what I thought was my final manuscript, it was not my final manuscript, I made a map. So I took a bunch of papers, taped them all together, and drew a line. And I chronologically marked what was happening in each chapter and then mapped the emotions that were going on. So if we start here and Nova's like this next chapter, I wrote down what plot wise is happening, but also her feelings, what is going on underneath the surface. And I charted the emotions, like what were the high peaks of activity, what were like the lows, the dark night of the soul. And from there, I was also able to decipher which scenes were repetitive. Some scenes just needed to be either merged, or if there were like two or three of the same kinds of, like, she was at a party. It's like, we get it. She's at a party. Okay. We don't need three scenes of her at a party. We can just condense this into one. Seeing it laid out visually definitely helped me.
Okay, I love that because I'm also a visual person. I think that's awesome that you mapped out emotions. So when you were looking at this through an emotions lens, were you trying to make sure that there was like a balance, like a subtle arc of emotions, and then we get like a dip of reprieve? Or like what were you looking for when you were plotting that out?
I needed to space out the high tension points, because if it's like 5 chapters in a row where you're just tense, as a reader, you you don't wanna experience that. You're gonna wanna put the book down because you just need a break, you need a breather. So definitely I needed to space out the heavier moments with moments of reprieve. So it was definitely helpful mapping it out in that sense, because then I could get a sense of where is it too heavy? Where is it, and because also when it's too heavy, it sort of underscores the emotional intensity.
Hmm.
Yeah, so definitely just playing around with what went where. Some of the scenes that were initially in the beginning, they went in the end, and vice versa. So I played around with the intention of having that roller coaster effect.
That's really insightful. And I feel like important when it is like a character centric story, or as sometimes people in publishing call it, a quieter story, because there's not a lot of like, crazy action fight scenes, right? But it's a lot of the internal development. So instead of plotting out maybe like a more traditional, which I'm using quotations if anyone's listening, because obviously what does that even mean? But, like a plot structure or like the beats you're trying to like hit at each moment because there's an overarching, like really big action heavy plot going on. I feel like for the internal novel, you do have to do that with how your character's feeling instead of what's happening to them externally. You have to reflect that internally. So it's a really cool way of doing that by mapping out visually the roller coaster of emotions that we go through. So with how emotional this novel is, and you said you were trying to like map out or space out, I guess, the tense moments. What moments in the book bring some levity to Nova's life?
Yeah, I think I wrote this before I learned anything about story structure and about writing craft, but I think intuitively I knew that I wanted her arc to be very messy and sort of a negative one. So there were going to be moments where she thinks she's, healing, quote unquote, and she's doing better. So maybe she does, like, let me think. What are some actual moments of I think that I would not call this book a romance. It does have a romantic subplot with Daisy, but the romance is definitely not in the forefront of the story. But I think the moments with Daisy allowed me to I wanted Daisy to be a foil
Mm.
to Nova, as what would happen if Nova gave in to the temptation of being her worst self, of indulging in her self-destructive behavior, what that path could look like. So Daisy is both that temptation and also her reprieve, because there is no one else who quite understands how how dark
Hmm.
Nova is feeling. Daisy is both Nova's haven and also the place that she could end up destroying herself. And so that was a fun place to play around with that sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
Also, I think moments with her younger brother, but not many. I think moments with food. She enjoys food a lot, and that is a good way to bring her back into her body in a place that feels safe and comforting, as opposed to making her want to detach and what's the word?
Pull back, detach, pull back.
When you're watching yourself from outside of yourself.
Disassociate?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the time when she's not dissociating, is when she's able to find a pleasure in being physically there, is when she's enjoying good food.
That's amazing because I personally love when stories like take those pause moments and focus on food. Maybe it's because when I was studying creative writing, I wanted to be a food writer, fun fact. So I, loved all of that, like the descriptions of food and like how food makes us feel. And I think that's a really cool point that you made of making those moments be where she comes back into her body and like out of her head, because that is such a good descriptor of what food can do and what is important when living something like post traumatically is like trying to find places that make you come back to your body and like be present and not like live up in the hailstorm that might be your mind. But you also said that you wrote this book, before studying structure or craft, etc. But I just want to say I think that's great personally. I think that sometimes, and I'd love your take on this too, and maybe sometimes this happens more because I watch like AuthorTube and like people talk about story structure, or I'm on Instagram and, we see everyone talking about their outlining process and story structure. And I love studying story and story structure, but structure is like a studying tool. Like it was invented as kind of like something that you put up post mortem of a book, not necessarily something that we do at the forefront. And I've even been realizing, at least for me this year, that I've focused way too much on story structure, and then you kind of miss the story. I'd love your thoughts on that as well, with like story structure and, either following it or just being more intuitive.
Everyone has their own process, but I'm realizing that I feel the best when I go more intuitively. I think all the times where I felt stuck and like I was banging my head against a wall and going insane were the times when I was trying to plot. Just looking at a story so distanced from it, to me, you're too far from the characters to be in their shoes and to experience what that would be like immediately. And so to me, that distracts from doing the work of writing it, because I think it helps with conceptualizing, but that won't get any words on the page if you're stuck trying to figure out. I think it helps once you're in maybe draft 2 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it can be detrimental when you're trying to figure out the story itself and you're just stuck on, okay, like what is the setup?
Right.
Because like I'm working on something new now and I wanted to have the perfect outline. I wanted to follow the perfect structure and to make it the most enjoyable for a reader. But it was so hard to fit it into
Mm-hmm.
this puzzle box, into these pieces. And I've found that what works really well for me is either leaving the structure for draft 2 or 3 or later on, or what I like doing now is I start with a character. I start at a point. I know their fatal flaw. I know where they wanna go, and I just outline chapter by chapter. I'll write the first chapter or write for the first scene. From there, the character is presented with a choice, and based on that choice, I outline the next chapter or 2, but once I'm writing those chapters, everything sort of shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I have that outline, I usually end up scrapping or deviating from it. So taking a step and then putting out feelers for the next few scenes, writing those scenes and then repeating, that is what I find really fun and exciting about discovering your world.
Well, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head as well with just how to tackle pacing, because like how you're approaching every chapter or scene is proper pacing. It's like your character is presented with something to do. What do they do? And now they have, an answer, but they might have a consequence which leads to another choice. So it seems like you're already intuitively like doing everything. And I love that you kind of lean into it. Seems like this whole time you've been talking about how you just have a lot of good intuition on story and, what type of story you're trying to tell. And your process is making sure you can kind of strip away all the structure, really, to make sure that you can hone in on the characters, on the story you're trying to tell, to make it the best story that it possibly can be. And I feel like a lot of people have like lost that sometimes. So I think that's great that you are able to just intuitively kind of flow through Nova's story.
Well, I don't know about you, but my favorite part of reading is the emotional parts, is
Yeah.
when a text can elicit something from you that you didn't expect. So I think that's why my focus is usually on the characters and what they're feeling. And that doesn't lend itself to every story. But for me, that is what I enjoy reading and writing are
Yeah.
those it's all the emotional twists. So I think if I just focus on that aspect, if I for me it's about conflict and mystery. So if you
Mm,
get those two things down, it doesn't matter what genre. If you have some sort of curiosity seed and intrigue, and then you have conflict, conflicting desire and fear, then the rest is like a playground.
yeah. No, that's great. I wrote down tone when you mentioned it earlier, talking about like reader feedback. And I find tone so interesting and so frustrating. And maybe I harped on it because currently for the story I'm writing, I've been fiddling a lot with tone. And that's one thing I'm constantly trying to do when I'm going back to read chapters is making sure every scene matches in tone. And I just want to ask, how the heck do you do that? How the heck do you approach tone? Like, do you know going into a story, like, this is what I want it to sound like tonally? Or, I don't know. What's your process? How do you feel about tone?
I went into writing with zero thoughts about tone. That was not on my radar. I'm just like, I'm gonna write what I write. It's gonna come out how it comes out. And so it was definitely more of a revision process note that came to my attention because, for example, Nova, she's 20 years old. There's some scenes where she's with other, 20-year-olds. And I think that the way that 20-year-olds talk can
Mm,
be in conflict with a more literary
yeah.
text. So it can be disjointing when you're reading a super flowery scene and then all of a sudden the characters are talking like random 20-year-olds.
Yes.
So there was definitely moments where it didn't match, but it didn't come to my attention until someone else was like, "Okay, I'm confused," or this feels weird, this feels off. Because obviously as the writer, it doesn't feel weird to you, otherwise you wouldn't write it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the importance of getting feedback from other people, but trusted feedback comes in. Someone who can deliver that in a kind way. Yeah, I don't have any tips on how to do that yourself. I think I would drive myself crazy because I would
Yes.
just overthink every single step. I think it would be really hard.
I think you're right. That makes me feel a lot better about my story because I think you identified the issue that I'm having too. So I wonder if it's true for like other writers. And yeah, it's making the descriptive text and the dialogue match tonally. And I keep talking to some people about how, because I'm also writing like an adult book with adult characters, but I feel like the tone feels YA sometimes because of like their reactions to things. They might be overreactionary or like what they say in like a really intense moment. So I like that you mentioned that like the dialogue and the descriptive language weren't necessarily married at the time, but now they're more cohesive. But that is an interesting balance to do because you're right, like 20-year-olds speak a lot differently than maybe 30-year-olds do. And so being able to balance that out with the I guess, like deeper topics that you're talking about, and the purple prose that you're putting into the descriptive language is a balancing act for sure.
Definitely, because there's also a part of me that rebels against that.
Mm,
Because what do you mean it needs to all fit? People are not, they aren't just one tone. People are so many tones.
yeah.
And she can be, well, Nova can be, in my mind, I think she's allowed to be lyrical one moment and the next just a complete goofball. I don't
Yeah.
think people need to have just one thing that stays consistent. So then, there's that, it's the balance between you as the writer versus you as the reader.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't have the exact answer for you. I hope that one day we can figure that out.
No, that's okay. I feel like that is most writing, right? I don't feel like there's always an answer. Is writing is still an art form, always exploring the process of these different aspects of writing. So I don't feel like there's always an answer. I just, wanted to see your take on it because I hate tone. It drives me nuts. I'm glad that it drives other people's nuts because it makes me feel better about my writing process. But that's true. It's all about balancing. You touched on the characters not being one tone because I do think that happens a lot. I also am like a huge fantasy reader, so I keep coming back to like these fantasy examples, but I think a lot of times we can get stuck on making sure like each character does a specific thing, but then they become like one note. So you have like the goofy character who's like goofy all the time. Even when like everyone's dying around you and they're like cracking jokes and you're like, would the goofy character still be goofy in this moment or would they break just a little and maybe freak out with the rest of us? So I like that you touched on that because it is true. Like as humans, realistically, even a very goofy person who might be goofy all the time, like you said previously, can maybe not, they don't have to be so goofy around other people. It depends on who they're with and what people bring out in them, which I think is a really important process of making more well rounded characters or characters feel more real instead of just one note.
I think also it's because everyone and every character has different breaking points. So what
Mm,
might break your main character has a completely different context in someone else's life. So their different reactions are so valid, and something that your main character thinks is like a no-brainer can completely destroy some other character. I think that's a fun place to explore
mm,
their dynamics and why they're different.
yeah. That's very true. That's very, very true. I think that's a good way to also, like you said, like explore a character, a good lens to come from. So now that Skin of Gold is getting published, which is super exciting, what do you feel like has been the most exciting moment so far? And then maybe the most not so exciting moment so far of the journey?
Well, let's see. Think so some good moments were definitely receiving my author proof. That was exciting because throughout this whole process, I've never printed out Skin of Gold. I've printed out drafts for other projects, but never Skin of Gold. So I think seeing it with its cover and bound really gave me hope, and it made me feel good about the book in a way that I hadn't in a long time. I've been grappling with a lot of doubt over the book and just wondering if I should have even published it in the first place or if I should have just shelved it. So seeing it printed really brought back a feeling of positivity with the project that I think I needed. And yeah, just so many times you put in effort into things and you're not sure if it's for anything.
Yeah.
And I think that that was why holding the book in my hands, having able to speak with you right now, and I had another writer reach out to me, Andrew Fleig or Fleeg. I should have asked him how can pronounce his name, but just having like you and Andrew reach out to me to speak about it, it's I think those small moments of connection
Mm,
that really make it something where it's not just making up words on your computer in your room. So those
yeah.
were definitely the highlights for me so far, and the not so not so good parts. Um, well, I think I definitely everyone says don't read your reviews. I know why now. It's really hard, but I
Yeah. But I think the most exciting moments that you talked about is really beautiful and a good reminder too that I don't know, I think this whole conversation with you honestly has been so refreshing because I feel like lately, again, I don't want to go off on a diatribe, but and I could, but lately I feel like the publishing space has been just really focused on the output and the commercial success because I get it, it's a retail business. We are selling a product that people are buying and they are liking or not liking and reviewing and buying more and telling people to buy it. But still, it is an art form. And so in this crazy late stage capitalism hellscape, we have to push out our books as a product, but it is first and foremost an art piece that you worked really hard on. And like you said, the highlights are the connecting points. Like that is what books, in my opinion, like should do to connect people through the emotions, like you said, that characters are feeling or acting upon, and hoping that every time you pick up a book, you learn something about yourself and others, I think is the most important part. So those are exciting moments. So you got to like print out your book and see the author proof, but then, like you said, talk about it with me, talk about it with other people, have those moments of connection. And I know they say don't read reviews, but I read some of the reviews and they are good. So I think it's great that there are people who are connecting with your story, like you said. And the book is already being that balm for people who can relate to Nova's experience.
the late stage capitalism really tries to make us feel like not just our books are products, but that we are products because
Yes.
authors nowadays, I feel like in the past they were able to just, write the book and then they could just be anonymous and disappear and have some semblance of privacy. Nowadays, there's this feeling of this need to market yourself and not just your book,
Mhm.
that it's vital for your career, that you have social media and email lists and all of these things that are it's more of a business
Yeah.
than anything. And I think that can be hard for a lot of artists
Mhm.
who just want to create their art. And so I think there's this push and pull between being an entrepreneur and being an artist, and how can we be both at the same time? But I think a lot of us are figuring out how to walk that line and necessity.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree. I think we've talked about it even on Instagram DMs a little and just about how crazy it is to feel like we have to market ourselves. Like, don't you wish we could go back to a time where like we don't remember or know what the authors look like? I remember not knowing what authors looked like. I remember just being like, wow, I love this book so much and I attach it to like the name on the front cover, but I don't even know what they look like because I was a kid and I didn't flip to like the very back flap cover where it showed their photo half the time. I just was like so engrossed in the story. And now we're all on social media hoping someone, connects with us and then connects with our work, which again could be a whole other podcast episode that we could talk about. You said that you were working on something else. What, like, if you can talk about it, what are you working on? And is it something similar in the vein of Skin of Gold, or are you veering into different territory this time?
I've learned a lot from the whole process of writing and publishing Skin of Gold and before publishing Queering. So there's a lot of lessons about the career of an author. And I think with my next projects, I think I want to focus more on building a viable career. I think for me, publishing Skin of Gold was important, where that sort of encapsulated all of the worst parts of me that I wanted so desperately to just bury. But by publishing it, I was giving myself permission to
Mm,
let all of that darkness out and telling myself that it's okay because this is just the beginning
yeah.
and we have so much more ahead. My next things I've always loved fantasy, so I've always wanted to do fantasy. I never thought that my first book or that I would ever write a literary contemporary book. So for my future projects, it's definitely working on a fantasy series. I wanted to work on just a really short romance novella to
Mm,
take a break from the complexity that is building a fantasy world.
yeah.
But you know how it goes. Now I've dug myself into a new route where I've connected this novella into a 13-book series that is connected to the big
Gosh. So
So,
you made it more difficult for yourself.
yeah, yes,
I love that.
it's a lot of fun. I wanna do, it's like a witchy
Ooh.
vampire Carmilla retelling. I'm still thinking about the direction I
Mhm.
wanna take this, and now that Skin of Gold was just for me, now I want my future projects to definitely be for my career and to build a
Yeah.
sustainable long-term series that is for readers.
Mhm.
So, I think I'm still in the process of I want to read like, right now, I don't even have the context of, like, the different categories within fantasy, like
Mm.
Gaslamp and paranormal and all these things, so I want to really do more research of reading all of the top books in all these genres, figuring out what I can see myself reading for and writing for many years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it sort of feels like a new beginning in many ways.
That's really exciting though, and I think I don't know, I feel like years ago, it wasn't as common for authors to switch lanes, like genre-wise even, like, if you were a mystery writer, you were a mystery writer, and people had to publish a different genre under a different pseudonym to get it out there, but I feel like those lines and those boxes are crumbling a lot more now. There's a lot more authors that are playing around with genre and age even, so like YA versus adult or middle grade, and I think that's really just exciting opportunities for all of us writers so that we can play with this because I don't feel like we have to be one track authors either. Like if you want to write a contemporary, write that. A fantasy. Those are also the two genres I kind of toggle between. So I plus I feel like it's the best place to live. Like you said, we need a break sometimes from the harrowing world building of fantasy and sometimes we just need to go back to reality literally and write a contemporary,
For sure.
which is great. Okay. I usually end with some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Perfect. Even though this first one I've realized isn't that good of a rapid fire and it's actually a pretty deep question. So if you need a moment, totally fine. But I like to ask it. What is a piece of art that has had profound impact on you?
Rapid fire.
Yeah,
Okay.
rapid fire.
Let's see. I would say I think that there are many books that I've enjoyed reading that have inspired me and just filled me with so much joy with reading. But I think okay, I have 2 answers. I have Wuthering Heights because I love the setting. I think the Moors take on a life of its own and sort of encapsulate so much of the characters' emotions, which get veiled behind the unreliable narrators. So I just I love that book. I love returning to that book. But I also really love Dictée because I think that the way that it resists translation, resists being torn apart and picked apart from meaning. and the way that it holds its own. To me, dictée is an exorcism for martyred women, for women who face so many atrocities, or not even just women, just Korean history. There's a lot to unpack there, but
Mm.
that book as a piece of art is transcends so many boundaries. It uses images, it uses different languages, it uses poetry and prose, and I mean, people have been trying to study this book for a long time and just doesn't get anywhere, and it makes it very eerie. I don't want to get too much into it, but yeah, that piece has definitely changed the way that I view what fiction can do.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, perfect answers, no notes. Which character from your own work, it could be Skin of Gold or anything else, would you grab a drink with?
Let's see. Definitely, I love all my characters, but maybe think the main character from my fantasy series.
Great. I feel like that's always the hardest question to ask because everyone is always like, "Oh, I have to pick one to hang out with." What is something totally unrelated to writing that you're obsessed with right now?
Oh my gosh. Do you know Episode?
No.
Okay, do you know Webtoon?
Yes.
So Webtoon recently launched their version of Episode, which is like it's like this app game where you can
Mm.
make choices.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, so I'm currently obsessed with that because of the way that I think choice interacts with the story, and we
Mm.
were talking about that earlier. And I've had these 2 books, that I think are extremely helpful, T. Taylor's
Ooh.
Universal Fantasy List, and
Ooh,
yeah.
seven-figure fiction. Okay.
So for fantasy authors, I recommend these, but it's just been fun going through the app's stories. They're all romance and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Going through those stories and finding all of the things that T. Taylor was talking about in her romance book, like what makes romance so addictive, what makes
Mm.
readers love these classic romance tropes, and finding that within the app has been such a fascinating study for me and really has unlocked my creativity for what I can use in romance.
Mm. That's really cool. I also love choice. You said that, and I think of like my favorite types of video games that I play are like choice related narrative games where like the outcomes you pick completely change the ending. And I think that is so fun to play around with. What would your warning labels say if you had to come with one?
I don't know, super depressing.
Love that. Warning, super depressing. And then I love reality TV. And so I don't know if you watch any reality shows, but I love like competition shows of all types. What reality show would you totally crush, do you think?
Okay, I feel like I'm working from a limited I don't know too
That's okay.
many,
That's okay.
but I'll say Survivor or it's the Korean one, Inferno.
Yes. Wait, I what is that? What is that? I
Those
know
might
what
be
you're talking
the only
about.
2 I know. Or Love Island, I don't know.
Singles
Those are
Inferno.
yeah, Singles Inferno. I'm not
Love Singles Inferno. I think it is an unhinged show because I love that they just like drop them on an island and they have to like walk miles to go get their water and then come back. But like it is so, I don't know, it's like an unhinged reality show, but then I always feel like the most wholesome connections are born from that show. Oh my gosh, no one said Singles Inferno and I love that show.
now that I think about it, it is similar to Survivor before that aspect.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. It's like it's people who normally would never apply for Survivor are being forced to sleep on cots and walk to go get their water. But I just love everything. And then they're just like playing to win their like date night at like this fancy hotel, which so fun. If no one's watched that show, please go watch it. It is so good. And then where can listeners connect with you and find your work?
Right now on YouTube and Instagram, both just at Caeli Faye. I would love to hear from people. My DMs are open.
Yay! And then when is Skin of Gold coming out?
November 11th, 2025.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that Skin of Gold should be out by the time that this comes out. So where can readers buy Skin of Gold once it's out?
It will be up on Amazon for both ebook and paperback, as well as should be, I think, like Hoopla, Libby,
Mhm.
Overdrive. I'll have a complete, I don't have the complete list off the top of my head, but I
That's okay.
use anywhere that Draft to Digital uploads to.
Perfect. Perfect. This is so exciting. Okay, is there anything else you want to touch on before we end this episode?
We covered a lot.
Perfect. Thank you so much for talking with me today, Caeli, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to my conversation with Caeli Faye about her debut novel, Skin of Gold. Skin of Gold is out now, so be sure to grab a copy or request a copy from your local bookstore and/or the library. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your writer friends or friends who read and want to pull back the curtain a little bit more on an author's journey. If you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, you can go ahead and follow so you never miss an episode, as well as leaving a review, which always helps us. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.